Okay, students, so you might have noticed that on Thursday I gave you a different homework than the one that's on Moodle. I'm going to go through both of them now. If you haven't started either of them, do the one I gave you on Thursday. If you've done the other one, fine. We can go through both of them. So this was the first question on the one from Thursday, the one about the motorway service stations. It says assess the likely impact on the profitability of motorway service operators if they are forced to display the prices of petrol at other outlets further along the motorway. So what it's saying is that it's something that's to do with increasing customer information. It's also likely to increase competition, as consumers will now know what other people are charging. Impacts are going to either be an increase or a decrease in profits. The most likely will be that it will decrease. Now it's got user cost and revenue diagram to support your answer. So the most straightforward way of doing this is just to start with your monopoly graph. Put the profit in at the profit maximizing point, and then if there is an increase in competition, there's going to be a fall in demand for that business. So your average revenue line is the same as your demand line, so that is going to fall, and at the same point what that means is that the profit will now be less. That's a simplified version. There is a more accurate version, but that's just showing you how that there will be less competition. So what you can say is that as the information increases in terms of people knowing what the price are, then demand or average revenue will fall. And as average revenue falls or shifts inwards, just to be completely accurate, this will cause the fall in total revenue, which will lead to a fall in profits for the same costs. So the ceteris paribus here is that your cost curves aren't changing. So there we've got one half of the assess part. Just remember to apply it to the market for motorway services and petrol. Reasons why it might not lead to, so either that profits increase or that profits stay the same. You might say that consumer demand is inelastic due to the fact that that distance might be too great. So the distance between the service stations might mean that you've got 5 miles of petrol left, but it's 20 miles to the next service station, so you have to go to that current service station. You could talk about how it will depend on whether your prices are lower or higher. So actually, if you are the lower priced business, your demand will go up, but if you are the higher priced business, your demand will go down, and in that case they will have higher profits. You could also talk about how that this might lead to a price war, and if it does, it might mean that some firms leave the market, and if they leave the market, then there will be a reduction in competition, and less firms might mean that they can go back to profit maximizing and raise their prices even further. So the next question, again looking at the same market of road service stations, it's saying Motto, Welcome Break and Road Chef control more than 85% of the market. So we know that kind of this is likely to be an oligopoly, but also within that there will be one firm which is a monopoly. Discuss the possible reasons why few firms dominate this industry. So another way to look at this is why firms get big. So the easiest arguments to make, one of them is to achieve economies of scale. So you can analyse that using the graph, give some examples for this market, possibly high sunk costs that need to be spread out, so the high fixed costs, and as they are spread out across a greater number of areas, they can benefit from economies of scale. You could then talk about diseconomies of scale, of them being too big, and those leading to higher costs for the business. You could look at barriers to entry as being a reason why it's hard to get into this industry, so that's why there's a few firms dominating it. And in that case you would apply it to some kind of example, potentially marketing, or again high sunk or setup costs. So the cost of the land, the cost of building the infrastructure on the land might be significant for someone entering into this market. Might also be some regulation affecting the location where you can put these in the UK. In terms of the opposite of that, you could link it into barriers to exit. So the reason that they stay in the market and get big isn't because it's hard to get in the market, it's just it's hard to leave the market. So that's when you would look at sunk costs specifically, and say it's quite the infrastructure itself might be hard to sell on. In terms of it depends upon, you could then look at something like intervention from the Competition and Markets Authority. So to what extent they would intervene, and if they did, they might break it up. So you could say the possible reason might be that, or the possible reason for intervention is that there is either some kind of collusion in the market, or that there is evidence of price fixing. And this might mean that if the CMA does intervene, this might break up some of those businesses and make them smaller. Okay, this is one of the questions from the other homework, the one that's on Moodle. It says, explain one reason why firms in the Bangalore poultry industry experience a severe fall in profits. Now, just in terms of supply and demand, there is an increase in their cost of production, which is going to affect the business, but it also mentions a fall in customer sales, so there's a fall in demand. In terms of a market structures graph, you could, if you drew the monopoly graph and you added your profit onto that, if you raised your cost of production, so raised average cost, what you would get is a much smaller profit. So if you wanted to, that would be one way of explaining that in an A level detail. If you wanted to do it in an AS detail, you would just talk about higher costs of production. Rising average revenue stays the same, ceteris paribus. This would reduce profits to the business. The fall in demand would cause a fall to your average revenue, but then a fall to your total revenue. And then again, even if costs stay the same but they have increased, you're going to get a reduction in your profits as a business. The next question says, with reference to the information provided and your own knowledge, assess, so two-sided, different ways in which a business can grow. The two key ways in which the business can grow, and this gives you the two sides, are organic and inorganic, or growing from your own retained profits, which are reinvested, in capital, and that could be physical or human, and that will allow you to increase the output of your business. In terms of inorganic, that's going to be external growth, which means you might borrow some money from a bank, and that might mean that again you buy some capital, but the capital might be buying the actual physical business, so not a new business, and again that's going to increase the output of your business. The last question, discuss whether the objective of firm should always be that of profit maximizing. On the one side, so it's a discuss question, you're going to have profit max, and on the other side you are going to have another objective, and at the bottom you want an it depends upon point about why the objectives on this side are likely to be short-term objectives and why this one has to be the long-term objective. So that's going to be a time step. So in terms of profit maximizing, we would draw the graph, we'd add profit maximizing point on, we'd refer to abnormal profits, we'd state why a business needs profits, so to reinvest for growth. We'd define it as where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, and we might talk about it in terms of a monopoly being able to do it because they can raise their price to the profit maximizing level because they're a price maker. If we're going to apply it, when you apply it to a market, then we'd give an example of a monopoly here as British Airports Authority. There's a lack of substitutes there. Just remember that's a historic monopoly, so you'd probably say around 2006. The other objectives, so we could put survival on here and say survival, that's sales max. Sales max is where average cost equals average revenue. We'd say it's at P and Q on the graph. We'd talk about businesses going into price wars or competitions or to steal market share. We could give the example of low cost airlines there, and then again we've just referred back to the graph. In terms of short term, long term, we could then say it depends upon the level of competition, and we can say that in the short term that sales max is a competitive strategy, so this might occur in markets that are monopolistically competitive, but in the long term, if firms leave the market, so those that can't compete, if they are making a loss, this reduces competition, which might equal an oligopolistic market, and in that case they will go back to the profit maximizing strategy and the prices will come back up.